Hey, what's up? So, the older you get, the less you see your parents as your parents, and the more you see them as people. And when you start looking at your parents from a lens of a friend or a peer, even, you start noticing things about them they never noticed before. Like, for example, I've always noticed my parents, between them, they're dynamic. My dad seems to do most of the heavy lifting when it comes to chores. So, a lot of cooking, a lot of cleaning. From my perspective, it seems like my dad does most of it. And I always wondered, and they're very happily married, right? And I always wondered why my dad would agree to this arrangement. But I guess if you look at my mom not as my mom, but you look at my mom as my dad's precious wife, that arrangement actually makes a lot of sense. So in my household, it's something very similar. Like, for example, I do like 95% of all the dishes. And it's not like I was always good at doing dishes or I like doing dishes. It's just for some reason, I just end up doing all the dishes, right? So growing up, being the youngest in the family, I was actually very good at finagling my older brother to do all the dishes for me. But when it comes to my wife, somehow I just end up doing all the dishes, which isn't that big of a deal because honestly, doing dishes isn't that difficult when you have a machine that's dedicated to doing dishes for you. But basically, when it comes to chores in a relationship, whoever ends up hating that chore less is the one who ends up doing that chore all the time. So, for example, my wife enjoys or doesn't enjoy, she makes lunch, right? I don't know if she enjoys it or not, but she ends up making lunch. And I basically stop making lunch because I know she'll make it. So even if I'm at home and she's at home and I'm really hungry and she's busy, I'll literally just not eat because I know at some point she's going to make lunch and then I can eat it for free, essentially, right? So you're really just specializing these different chores. Whoever hates it less ends up specializing in that one. Kind of similar to the economy that you learn in like Econ 101. Let's say there's two countries. One of them produces coconuts, one of them produces bananas. One country will be more efficient at producing bananas, for example. And by definition, relatively, the other country will be more efficient at producing coconuts. So it makes more sense for those people to specialize in coconuts and bananas and then just trade. And that's how you get the most out of that economy. Similar in relationships, you just specialize and then you trade, right? And you have the most efficient relationship. So when it comes to specializing and trading in the economy of a relationship, one thing I also notice is that you're basically just enabling each other to not do that other chore. Like, for example, I'm never going to make lunch. You're never going to wash the dishes, which is totally fine because it makes sense, right? But similarly, let's say, for example, 5 years go by and everything's fine. What if you're like my parents, you're married for 40, 50 years and you have a lifetime of not doing this one particular action, right? Over the course of 40, 50 years, you're basically enabling the other person to never to forget that skill set. And one skill set I think is very relatable is like driving. Like, for example, I wouldn't trust my mom to drive from NorCal to SoCal because I'd be very worried because she doesn't drive that often. Right. I see a lot of other couples where the woman doesn't really drive that often because she's been enabled by her husband for their entire lifetime. Right. So, for example, I can see this starting in my relationship where I've driven my wife to LA from Irvine, which is like, 40, 50 miles in traffic because she doesn't like the traffic, whatever. And I realize I'm actually enabling her. So my argument is like, hey, I can't do this for you anymore because what if you become in 40, 50 years, this old lady that can't drive and just stuck in the house all day? So similar to how you can't just outsource all your defenses to America if you're a smaller country, you can't outsource all your driving to me because you know, you're going to be enabling yourself into not having that skill anymore. So that's my argument for not having to drive to LA anymore. Hope you guys enjoyed it. See ya.